Drage gostje, dragi gosti, dobrodošli na današnjem dogodku. Pozdrav vsem vam v dvorani v Hiši Evropske unije v Ljubljani in tudi vsem, ki nas spremljate v spletnem prenosu prek YouTubea. Sem Matej Škorjak z Generalnega direktorata za prevajanje pri Evropski komisiji in v čast mi je, da danes skupaj z Društvom slovenskih filmskih in televizijskih prevajalcev
in cooperation with the Association of Slovenian Film and Television Translators, entitled The Future of Translation. Is machine translation really the only way? Today's event will be an opportunity for pleasant socializing, while also shedding light on many issues relevant to translators, the translation public and the general public. After the initial introductory addresses, we will hear and listen to the first round of presentations. This will be followed by a 20-minute break and then the second round of presentations and a concluding round table. Let's kick off the event. I first invite to the podium Jernejo Jug-Irše, Head of the European Commission Representation in Slovenia. Thank you, Matej. I bid you a warm welcome at the EU House, also on behalf of the European Commission. As for translation, this is an activity that is changing dramatically due to the rapid technological progress. However, its purpose remains the same: to enable communication between speakers of different languages and also cultures. Multilingualism is one of the cornerstones of European culture and integration, and against this backdrop, translators and interpreters are often this hidden link who put this principle into practice and enable our citizens to better contribute to the building of the EU. The European Commission also has its own translation service, the so-called Directorate-General for Translation. In addition to its basic activity, that is, translation services for the needs of the Commission, among other things, they also organize the Jóvenes Translatores competition for the best young translator, maintain the IATE terminological database, and take care of the European Master in Translation network of universities. In 2014, they also launched the Translating Europe initiative, so as to strengthen cooperation between the various actors in the translation sector, that is, educational institutions, translation companies, associations, and others. And the main event within this initiative is the annual Translating Europe Forum. This November, several thousand participants follow the event live or online. And in addition to this central event, in different member states, we have smaller scale Translating European workshop, as we have it today. And as I also said, we will address the future of the translation profession in the context of machine translation. Of course, this is a very interesting topic, and I cannot escape the fact that the European Commission has been using our MT tool called MT e-translation. Not only that we are using it, we are also developing it. This online tool was initially intended for our institutions. However, now everybody can use it free of charge, safely throughout the EU by European public administrations, local and regional authorities, SMEs, freelance EU translators, universities, NGOs, and the Digital Europe projects. In contrast to other MT engines, our e-translation stands out because of two reasons. First is ensuring confidentiality and security of all translated data, because they are never transmitted to any third parties, and this data is deleted after a maximum of 24 hours. And then the second aspect, it's great user friendliness. First of all, it allows us to translate documents into all 27 official EU languages and also several languages at the same time. It also allows the translation of entire documents supporting almost all types of formatting and also preserves this formatting in the target language. Let's say that you have a scanned document, you get it in the PDF format, then you can input this into our e-translation, and then this is transformed and converted into Word format. You don't have to deal so much with these formal aspects, but with translation. I appreciate and value our MT tool because it really helps me as an occasional user. But I am well aware that you, as professional translators, these MT engines can sometimes pose a challenge, if I use this term. Why? One challenge being the remuneration of your work and also your copyright. I really hope, therefore, that today's conference will address these topics and respond to some of these challenges and, above all, shed light on what would be the optimum future of machine translation for all stakeholders and translation in general. I wish you a wealth of new insights while enjoying our event. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jerneja. Let us add something to your very interesting presentation. It is quite easy to use it, and I would like to invite you to register online, and this is actually all you need in order to be able to use it. Now I invite to the podium Jerca Kos, the president of the Slovenian Film and Television Translators. Please, the floor is yours. Good day to all the guests here in the hall and those who joined our live broadcast. Welcome also on behalf of our Association of Slovenian Film and Television Translators. We are really happy that you responded to the invitation to our event, which we prepared again this year in cooperation with the representation of the European Commission. I would like to thank them sincerely for their hospitality in the EU House and for helping us with the organization. As for machine translation, which will be discussed today, this is really a topic that has recently been at the forefront of debates among translators, as well as those who commission translations. Opinions range from complete excitement and stargazing to total rejection of this technology as completely useless. We were interested in whether the truth might lie somewhere in between, and if so, when CAT tools can be useful in translation and when not. Does this depend on the field of translation or perhaps how the translator is trained to work with these tools? What to look out for when editing machine translations? Or maybe, are there any translation genres of translation where the quality of MT is still too poor to be useful and relevant for now? We will try to answer all these questions and many other questions. We invited experts who participate in the creation of MT tools and those who use them on a daily basis to share their experiences when and under what circumstances these tools could be useful for translators, how they could be even more useful, and when they make the translation worse. I hope that you will find our presentations useful, informative. Please, Matej, let's kick off. Thank you, Jerca. We really want that today's conference would be as interactive as possible. Hence, you are welcome to put questions and comments immediately after hearing every presentation and also when we will have the roundtable at the end. Of course, those of you here can raise their hand. As for online participants, you are invited to enter questions and comments on our YouTube chat. Now it is high time for presentations. The first, we will have a pre-recorded video while other presenters will be here live. We will First here from the Czech subtitler Miroslav Pošta, one of the co-authors of the Machine Translation Manifesto, which is also here available in the English languages, and it also has been translated in the Slovenian language. Miroslav will tell you more about it. I bid a warm welcome to him.
Dober dan. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this exciting event. I'm so happy to be part of it, although I can't be with you in Ljubljana. This talk is pre-recorded. I'm some 600 kilometers away, but I'll be online for the Q&A session. Happy to answer any questions you may have. When AVTE published the Machine Translation Manifesto about a year ago, it attracted quite a lot of attention among professional subtitlers and in the industry as well. The manifesto is our take on machine translation. It's available from AVT's website, and it has been translated into a couple of languages, including Slovenian. The manifesto has been discussed at some other Translating Europe workshops, so I'm not going to introduce it once again. Instead, I'd like to elaborate on some of the most important points we raise in the document, and in particular, I'd like to discuss the other language technologies that are often sidelined and put them in context. But first, let me ask, does machine translation help? Well, of course, machine translation works for some types of text. For example, results are quite good for technical and legal translations. On the other hand, machine translation can produce hilarious suggestions, and it can be downright counterproductive for some other texts. And this is true for audio-visual translation, although machine translation can be helpful in some cases. For example, when it comes to some types of documentaries. Anyway, just like fire doesn't belong to children's hands, machine translation, in my opinion, should not be used by translators who don't know about its dangers. Otherwise, they may produce worse translations than they would produce without machine translation. Then the burden is usually shifted to the QCer. And therefore, in my opinion, if machine translation is to be used, its users should be trained. They should know how machine translation works, what they can expect, when it's safe to use it, and when it's not a good idea to use it. Let me mention some of the dangers. It's inconsistencies within the same text when the same words or expressions are translated in different ways. Misspellings in proper names. Situations when a word is translated as if it were another similar word. For example, draining translated as if it were raining. Too literal translation, including incorrect word order, which is a very common problem in translations from Germanic languages into Slavonic languages. Loss of richness and diversity of language. And something that is called hallucinations, even in scientific literature. It's when the translation has little in common with the original. The dangers are many, so it's small surprise that it turned out in an informal survey among a large team of subtitlers that the first thing most of them do when they get subtitles pre-translated by a machine is they delete the machine translation suggestions. Machine translation users should also know what other technologies there are to make their task easier and the quality higher. Another important point that needs to be raised again and again is that machine translation engines are trained by our translations. They try to simulate us. Make no mistake, they wouldn't work if there weren't for us translators. So we should really ask, is it fair that the authors of the translations used for machine translation training normally don't get a single cent for that? Some thinkers suggest that micropayments should be paid to authors of any data that is used to generate income. For example, Jaron Lanier elaborates on this idea in his book Who Owns the Future? Unfortunately, micropayments aren't a feasible option in machine translation at the moment. I think that we, subtitlers, translators, and translation scholars should team up with economists, lawyers, and technologists to look for ways to make it possible, because it would help achieve sustainability, and it's something that would benefit the viewers and clients as well. We are not Luddites, but we don't buy the recent hype. Machine translation is often presented as a technology which can or will soon be able to replace translators, although it is not true. Therefore, we like to shift the focus. We believe that technologies should be used where they are beneficial, and they should not be used wherever they are harmful. And indeed, machine translation can often be very harmful. Unfortunately, machine translation is often presented as the only technology there is, as the only language technology there is, as a panacea. At this point, I would like to mention an important concept, bytext. Bytext is bilingual text where the original and translation have been aligned. A sentence in the translation is matched with the corresponding sentence in the original. Bytext is a highly valuable asset because it can be used in several ways, as a translation memory or as a parallel corpus. But it can also be used to train a machine translation engine, build an autocomplete tool, and for other purposes. One of my messages to translators, and especially audiovisual translators, is that it is quite easy to make your own bytexts. That is, parallel corpora or translation memories using alignment tools. Then the aligned files can be used as a corpus per se, as a translation memory in a CAT tool, to build autocomplete tools in some CAT applications, or to train or fine-tune a machine translation engine. But for all of this, it is critical for translators to be able to keep their translations along with the originals so that they can use them in these and other ways. And this should be part of fair practices, enshrined in service contracts and respected by non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. Today, many NDAs don't allow us to keep our own translations, although they sooner or later become available on pirate servers. I've heard that some subtitlers download their own translations from pirate servers for their personal archive. I believe that NDAs should be revised. It's in the interest of our clients, because when we are equipped with these data and tools, we can provide better translations. Let me move on to another central concept, augmented translation. As I've said, there's too much fascination by machine translation. It's seen by many as the linguistic holy grail. Therefore, machine translation is sometimes developed at the cost of other technologies, and augmented translation allows all these technologies to be on an equal footing. The concept of augmented translation suggests that the translator is surrounded by different tools and technologies and chooses the right one at any given moment. The important thing is that it is the translator who is in control. They are in the driver's seat, if you like, and they are like the pilot in the cockpit. Therefore, the user interface should be configured accordingly. The translator should be able to turn on and off whatever they wish to. For example, it should be possible to hide machine translation suggestions when the translator wishes not to see them. Here you can see an illustration of the concept. It's from the Machine Translation Manifesto. The translator is in the center and is surrounded by all the exciting tools and technologies. Maybe we should add a few empty bubbles, because we'll certainly see new technologies emerging in the future. Now, what technologies could or should be part of the augmented translation model? Let me go through the most relevant ones and discuss whether or not they are available to audiovisual translators today. First of all, spell checkers. Today, we take them for granted in most language applications, but in some languages, spoken colloquial language, which we deal with in subtitles and dubbing most of the time, is very different from written language. Not only when it comes to vocabulary, but in some languages, the morphology is different as well. Unfortunately, spell checkers are rarely adjusted to spoken language. In my language, Czech, most spell checkers adamantly underline some of the most frequent colloquial words. Last year, I updated the most popular spell checker library, Hanspell, for my language, to ensure better coverage of spoken language. It was quite time-consuming, but it's definitely possible, even for highly inflected languages such as Czech. I'm not sure about agglutinative languages though, but I'm sure that existing spell checkers can be improved to be more helpful for audiovisual translators. I believe that this sort of effort shouldn't be undertaken by individuals working on open source projects. It should be organized and financed by companies developing language tools. By the way, one of the tools you need to build a robust spell checker is a large corpus of relevant texts. Another tool or another type of tools is grammar checkers. The only grammar checker I know for my language is in MS Word, and it may not be available for some other languages. As a subtitler, I cannot imagine having to do without it, because subtitles are more prone to grammatical errors due to segmentation. It's so easy to get things wrong around line breaks. So I always download or export my subtitles from the subtitling application I work in, convert them into normal text with no line breaks, and run the grammar checker in Word. Unfortunately, some clients don't allow their subtitlers to download their own subtitles, so they cannot do this important round of checks. Ideally, a grammar checker should be one of the functionalities of subtitling applications, and they should take into account line breaks. The next tool is voice input, or if you like, dictation functionalities. In non-audio-visual translation, many translators use dictation tools to save time and relieve their fingers and wrists. Some prefer them to machine translation. Unfortunately, some of these tools are not quite compatible with subtitling software. One problem is that you may have to reactivate the dictation tool in every single subtitle. Another thing is the problem with incorrect use of spaces and upper versus lowercase letters by some of the tools. Finally, some dictation tools are geared to certain professions, such as lawyers and doctors, who need very different vocabulary. So once again, it's a matter of colloquial vocabulary and, in some languages, morphology as well. Because some voice input solutions change colloquial language to non-colloquial language, which is something we don't want. I'm confident that little effort could make a huge difference, adjusting dictation tools to the needs of subtitlers and dubbing translators. The next tool or functionality I'd like to mention is concordancing in translation memories or searching corpora. Language service providers have huge amounts of bytext that could be used to look up words, phrases, or even grammatical structures, either monolingually or bilingually. What subtitlers might also appreciate is the ability to search their own translations they have made in the past. This is something that CAT tool users take for granted, but it's wishful thinking for us subtitlers. Sometimes we just need some inspiration. We need to see different options that have been used either by ourselves or by our colleagues to translate a certain expression, instead of seeing just one and only solution offered by the machine translation engine. The next tool is, or next type of tools, is autocomplete tools. With an autocomplete tool, you type the first one or two letters of the word you need to enter, and the tool suggests expressions it has found in its dictionary as equivalents of words found in the original, in the segment that you need to translate, or in the subtitle that you need to translate. Again, it's a relatively common functionality in CAT tools, yet I'm not aware of any subtitling applications that have this tool. The dictionary is another tool, or the dictionary that is at the core of the autocomplete functionality. It could be made searchable. So you would get something like the word alignment database on the Opus website, or the translation equivalence database from the Czech National Corpus. And here it is. It's called TREC. Here I chose the Czech-English combination and looked up equivalents of the Czech word otrok, which has a meaning very different from the same word of Slovenian. So here you can see the English equivalents found in the dictionary, in the database. There are less technologically demanding solutions that benefit the subtitler as well. For example, links to existing online dictionaries. But it's something that we can make on our own. We can use AutoHotkey to set up shortcuts to search some online dictionaries. Here is the code for a shortcut which will look up words in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Highlight the word you need to look up and press Ctrl-Shift-E. Another tool is something I refer to as collaboration tools. It's tools that allow all people working on a certain title to communicate, to discuss things, both horizontally and vertically. That means the individual translators working into the different languages, as well as all the specialists upstream and downstream, template makers, translators, QCers, but maybe also the script writers and others. And Of course, there are certainly other tools that I have not mentioned or that will emerge in the future. As for machine translation, I'm sure that it will become more and more advanced. Sooner or later, we'll probably see interactive machine translation, where the suggestions will change dynamically as you type. And also, one day, we may be able to set a threshold of reliability so that only suggestions of a certain quality, above a certain quality threshold, will be offered. We don't know how these innovations will change the machine translation experience, so it's yet to be seen how beneficial they will be. At this point, let me squeeze in a small practical section for subtitlers who would like to make their own translation memory or corpus and use it in some of the ways I've just described. Very briefly, you first need to clean up the subtitle files, both the original and the translation. You remove things such as the codes, tags, and line breaks. The next step is to align the files. And once you have the alignment, you can import the TM in a CAT tool that supports subtitle files. You can search it in another application. You can use it to build or fine-tune a machine translation engine. We don't have time to go through the process in detail, so I'll show you just some screenshots for some of the steps. If you have just a few files to process, you can use Subtitle Edit to remove the line breaks. It's shareware, quite popular among fansubbers and even professional subtitlers. Open the file in Subtitle Edit, click File, Export, Plain Text, choose Merge All Lines and save. It's also a good idea to remove hyphens and tags for italics. Probably most popular alignment tool is LF Aligner, which is shareware developed by a colleague of ours, a Hungarian translator, András Farkas, and its core uses a program called Hanalign. LF Aligner produces a bilingual TXT file and a TMX file. In the process of alignment, you can view the suggested alignment, check it, and fix misalignments. Here, I've tried to align English and Slovenian subtitles for the film Forrest Gump. It's subtitles downloaded from OpenSubtitles.com, and I have no idea if it's a professional translation or fan subs because there's no credit. Anyway, they can serve as an illustration. You can see that there's a misalignment in lines 12, 13, and partially line 14. Let me give you some time to take a look. My experience is that the percentage of misalignments is usually quite low and that it's better to live with it than spend time fixing the misalignments. Now, this is a tool for searching the alignments, the translation memories. In other words, you don't need a CAT tool to search your aligned files. This is my favorite application, TM Lookup, also by András Farkas. This screenshot shows how you can search the Forrest Gump alignment. The program is very fast and can search huge files. By the way, TM Lookup comes with a file which explains how to make an auto hotkey script to access TM Lookup from any application with a shortcut. This is another application you can use for viewing your alignments, Xbench. And finally, As I've mentioned, you can use your aligned files to fine-tune a machine translation engine, and namely, you can do it in a tool called OpusCat. OpusCat is a free desktop-based neural machine translation tool. You need to download a pre-trained engine for your language combination, for your language pair. Unfortunately, engines are available only for the most common language pairs. Once you have the engine, once you have downloaded the file, you can customize, or as it's called, fine-tune the engine using your translation memory. My experience is that OpusCat works best as a plug-in in a CAT tool. Okay, this has been a short tasting of the technologies you can use even when they aren't available in the subtitling software you use. And now it's time for a wrap-up. I've shown a handful of technologies that may be beneficial to the translator and, in turn, the client and the viewer. Some of them may be even more powerful than machine translation, and it should be left to the individual translators to decide which technologies they will use at any given moment of the creative process. No matter what technologies are provided to the audiovisual translator, they should not be used as an excuse to lower subtitler fees, as is so often happening. We have seen companies introducing machine translation tools and slashing rates by as much as 30%. That is not justified by the real impact on productivity and quality. Remember, many subtitlers prefer not to use machine translation suggestions at all. Also, whatever technologies are employed, the conditions and the entire ecosystem should be set up with sustainability in mind. Otherwise, the best subtitlers will be forced to look for other jobs or they will suffer. And in whose interest is it to have either inexperienced
Thank you, Miroslav. We finished early. Maybe it was quite difficult for you here to watch in the hall, but you will be able to see everything. We will have a recording, and if you wish, we will also send you this material. We would like to thank Miroslav for a very interesting presentation. Miroslav has joined us, and he will be available online. I would like to take this opportunity to ask you to put questions to him. This interactive part of the conference will be moderated by Jerca Kos, the president of the situation. I've already presented her to you. And just another thing, if you raised questions in the chat, it was not functioning well, so please refresh the chat page, and then you will have an opportunity to put the question to Miroslav. Jerca, I leave everything to you, Mirek, and the audience to moderate the debate. Hello, Mirek. Can you hear us? Mirek, can you hear us?
I can hear you perfectly. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Everything is okay. The connection seems to be working. I would like to invite the audience to put the question. Are there any questions for Mirek? Yes, Grega, please go ahead. Matej will just pass on the mic to you so you can pose a question to Mirek.
Hi, can you hear me? Upam, da me slišite. Pozdravljeni.
You can also put a question in the Slovenian language because we have interpreters here, and it is also easier for all of us to speak the Slovenian language, and everything is interpreted into English, so no worries. Especially when it comes to subtitling, it is often overlooked that subtitlers have lost the control over the entire translation process. For example, agencies often prevent to edit and modify time codes. They also prevent the merger or segmentation of subtitles, so that we would have fewer subtitles or to have more subtitles. This is prevented, and this has, of course, an impact on the entire quality of the translation. How to persuade these translation agencies? Low-budget agencies are not even familiar with the translation process, or even if they are, they prevent basic procedures that subtitlers use. Again, how to persuade translation agencies that this is a necessity and that this is of key importance that translators really need in order to produce a high-quality translation.
Yeah, this is a great challenge, and sorry, I have to turn down the volume so I can't hear myself. Yeah, I agree with you. This is a huge challenge, and it has very much in common with it has very much to do with the general working conditions, and machine translation is also one part of that. I believe that there are only two ways to change this. First of all, we have to communicate with the clients. We have to negotiate with them. After all, it has turned out from a recent survey by AVTE that those subtitlers who negotiate with their clients get better rates. And I believe that the people who negotiate may also get better conditions. The problem is that, in my opinion, most people do not negotiate. So that's one thing. We have to be active participants in the dialogue with the clients. Maybe sometimes the clients don't even realize there's a problem with one of their procedures. And the other thing is that we need to be active in our professional associations because as individuals there's very little we can change. When we work together in negotiations, it's easier for us to be heard, and then, of course, we, the individual associations in the different countries, cooperate within the European Federation, AVTE, which can be heard even more, in my opinion. So it's really up to us to try and be active participants of the relationship with our clients.
Thank you, Mirek. Are there any questions from the audience at this stage? There is a hand raised. A bit of warm welcome to Mirek as well. I would like to know about the situation in your country, in the Czech Republic, when it comes to machine translations in audiovisual area. Is there a lot of such cases in practice, or is it just in the initial stage? How is the situation in general?
Well, of course, I don't know all the clients, but I think I have quite a general idea. In my experience, machine translation is mostly employed by the international players, by the large companies, whether they are vendors or the end clients. So it's mostly the large companies that train their own machine translation engines, and their approaches are very different. Some of them force the audiovisual translators to use the machine translation suggestions. They consider their work really to be not really translation but post editing, while others leave it up to the translators whether they want to use it, use the suggestions or not. So it's very different in this respect, and I think the situation might be slightly different because Czech is one of the languages that have the advantage in that the major clients localize into Czech, while I know that Slovenian is localized only for some of the major streaming platforms. For example, I know that there are some streamers don't localize into Slovenian, so maybe that's why we encounter machine translation perhaps a bit more often than you do. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? If not, I would like to put one question to Mirek myself. Mirek, you presented in detail the concept of bytext, where you align the original and the translated text. When specifically do you use it yourself when undertaking audiovisual translation as a subtitler? So when do you use this tool? When is it useful to you? Only when you have several episodes of the same series, or maybe there are other cases where this is relevant? So specifically for you, when is this bytext relevant for your work?
Well, yes, if I had a little bit more time, in an ideal world, I would align all my translations. But unfortunately, it's not possible at the moment, or I don't think it's maybe so important to have everything. But I definitely use these tools when I work on series. For example, when I work. Let's say I'm assigned to work on the second season of a series, and either I did work on the first season or I didn't. In any case, I download the first season or try to get it somewhere online, align it. So that I can search the translation, both the translation and the original, for the sake of consistency, for example, or just to see how things were translated. Because even when it was done by myself, maybe it was a year ago. So that's one of the scenarios when I definitely try to use these tools, if it's possible, if I can get hold of the existing translations and originals from the past.
Thank you. This was very interesting to hear. Are there any more questions from the audience? If not, for now, we would like to thank you, Mirek, and we will hear from you at the end, at the round table. Thank you. Thank you. And now a slight change in our original program. The next planned speaker was unfortunately unable to come to our conference. Hence, I would like to announce our next speaker, András Repar, from the Alquid company. Within the framework of the project development of Slovenian in the digital ecosystem and environment, he is responsible for the collection of translation. Please, András, the floor is yours. Good day, my name is András. I wear two hats because I'm a representative of the translation company, but I'm also a representative of the project called the Development of Slovenian in the Digital Environment. I have been collaborating on this project. It is slowly about to end. It deals with machine translation, collecting texts for MT learning, and I will shed light on this, and I will present some general information. But in order to begin with my presentation, yes, I need to be equipped with technology in order to do that. Anyhow, initially, I thought it might be interesting to you to present to you how MT engines work now, because we are in the year 2022, or rather in the past couple of years, how do we make this transition from an MT engine, be it Google Translate, DeepL, or anything that is out there that some company produces or generates on its own. We need some sort of knowledge, linguistic knowledge, expertise. It can be grammar, morphology, rules, or texts in general. A few years ago, when they started with machine translation, they had root-based MT engines, many rules which were followed, enabling us to generate an output, a translation. It didn't work quite well. This is quite a creative process, and often there were several exceptions to the rule. And then there was a development, some statistical methods were introduced in order for text to be generated. And over the past 10 years, there was an emergence of neural MT engines, because they use neural networks based on mathematical procedures or equations, enabling us to make the prediction of probability. Whether we have MT engines such as Microsoft, Google, or DeepL, they all work in the same way. We have the collection of texts, bytexts, as we heard the term before, and then these texts are converted. They're converted into numbers, vectors. This is high school mathematics for you. What are the procedures in place? They are quite complex, but let us present some basics. We could say that I have a corpora, my name is András, and based on this, I can illustrate this with an example below. I make a small table. Each column has a word, and we have zeros and ones. Let's say that we have 4 vectors, 4 words. And where there is a match, we have 1. Where there is no match, we have 0. And this operates in a mathematical way. If you have a large corpus with more complex procedure than the one that I have just described, then we have seen that you can also calculate with words. Minus plus woman being a king or queen, so you use vectors for that. This is the basic principle. Then you have neural networks at several levels, several layers. This is quite abstract. You don't know why something is happening, but in the end you get a linguistic model, and we can pose different questions. Let's say that we have 3 words. My name is. which word is the most, where we have the highest probability that a certain word will follow after this sequence, and there we have calculations for that. And my name is Andras, which is the most probable translation for these words, given the data that we used initially to start this learning of MT tool. This is how this procedure works. Maybe you have noticed that we don't have any input from a linguist to inform the process, and this is really the case. Not only those who are engaged in this linguistic model for MT, but the entire procedure of artificial intelligence, which is quite popular. We don't know why we have certain results, why we have certain translations or outputs. I will give you one example. GPT-3. I don't know if you are familiar with this model. It is a linguistic model which can say a lot. This is the Guardian article 2 years ago, and the article was written promptly about this robot who wrote this entire article. This is a bigger project, linguistic project, that everything else, 500 billion words. This is used as the basis for learning, and several billions of different parameters were used in the process. And based on this, they calculate the different results for questions that we put within this model. It might be interesting to see different examples of MT outputs. Some are good, some are not so good. But what can this GPT-3 do if we present a certain topic and we say, write this in 2 sentences, the topic being Slovenia. I wake up in a cold sweat. I cannot tell if I'm still dreaming or I'm really in Slovenia. It is quite interesting. If I continue, the European Union is the topic. I don't know whether you can see this. The news article about the European, I clicked on it, you have been selected, etc., etc. It is funny, not so much horrific, but then there are also some examples about the neural network. This is the input about being self-aware. It was looking into its eyes, and so it was only a matter of time before it could kill me, etc., etc. Another example for translator, or maybe the last one, subtitles. I was watching a movie in the subtitles when I observed that they were starting to move. It is quite good. The result, the output is rather good. Grammar or other errors are not to be found. It is similar to a human translator. If we have longer texts, however, you see that then some things don't make sense. There is no logic. It lacks this world knowledge. So the suprasentential level is problematic. It doesn't only do this, it can do a lot of other things. To have a computer code to sum and to explain to you what this computer code can do in the text. And another thing, not just machine translation, not just generating different texts. There are certain algorithms where you give it a certain prompt, a text. In this case, we have a gentleman author. In the 19th century portrait, and this generates a certain image. The concept is the same as learning when it comes to MT engines. We have data input, and this is converted into mathematical representations, vector inputs, images, you name it. And then based on these numbers and vectors, you come up with complex algorithms. Finally, you get a model. And you can put questions, and based on this input, we get the best possible results. It is possible to have several results based on how we set our parameters. However, if we go back to machine translation and empty engines for Slovenian, we have quite a good range of empty engines. Prior to Google Translate 10 years ago, things were not so well developed in this area compared to some other languages. However, today, if we compare empty in Slovenian and other languages, almost all big providers also offer Slovenian. And another thing which might be of interest to you, the so-called zero-shot translation. What does this mean? I believe that Google was the first to come up with this solution. What they did, let's say that you have the language combination, English-German, and then you use this for English-Italian and vice versa. This model can translate also German and English, although it was not trained based on this pair. They invest a lot of efforts. Maybe you don't see it quite well, the image below. This is the Facebook article published this year. They devised a model, and you can use this for 200 languages for translation. Why is Facebook doing this? Of course, they don't want to deal with professional translators. They want to have these translations on their platform. They would like to have more and more people. And this can be also done that you offer translation services to those who don't speak English, or you enable communication and you open this channel to all who don't speak English or other languages. And this is one of the ways to do it. If you can see this, they said that they improved quality by 45%. Well, this shouldn't be taken for granted. Rather, we should question what was the model used for this calculation, what was it based on. But if I refer to our previous speaker, it seems that this seems to be the only language technology, but especially those who are responsible for algorithms in MT, they are not interested about what are the needs of professional translators. They are developing, I speak about Google, Facebook, they use it for their own social media platforms to serve their needs and to have as much content there as possible. This is the situation. Everything is moving into MT. Other projects are sidelined because of this reason. The needs are as I have just described. If I now proceed and present our project, development of the Slovenian language in the digital environment, this project wanted to develop language technologies for the Slovenian language. Financing body, the Ministry of Culture, and we also have European funds for that. It is now slowly coming to an end. It started in 2020, a 3-year project. We will finish it quite soon. Maybe to answer the question, why is it good for Slovenia to fund the development of language technologies? Why should we fund the development of MT? That we will come to the situation where professional translators might lose a job. However, modern development of languages is computer-based. The focus is on computers. And these models call for enormous processing capacity. The model that I have just demonstrated, it takes months. Empty engines, well, it takes months and months for them to learn. And where you have money. These are American multinationals, and they dictate the development. Google has most of the technologies that are available also for the Slovenian language, but maybe strategically it doesn't make sense that we don't have it in Slovenia. Because when Google decides that they won't offer this, we won't have a special service for the Slovenian language. And this is happening, actually, that we are a second-class language. Not so much when it comes to MT, but maybe for other areas, application of language technologies, smart assistants, Siri, Google Assistant, etc. I don't think that they offer Slovenian. If this development continues, let's say in 10 years, we will just talk to our domestic appliances. Bosch, a German company, it is not in their interest to develop language technology for the Slovenian language because our market is too small for that. It is not financially viable. However, if in Slovenia we already have some technologies which we have developed, we can take it out of the shelf, use it for certain products, then this might benefit us and our oven might speak a Slovenian. This project had 6 segments, and I added the 7th one because I thought it might be of interest to you. First area, different corpora. We are all familiar with Frida Janens, Kopuskas. Collecting new data for corpora, better tagging. What was important? Algorithms for text annotations and highlighting. I don't know whether we are familiar with this or not, but there are some algorithms in place which are extremely precise, let's say 95% or even more, and they can annotate or tag a certain word with lem, different gender, number, etc. And this is quite important. This is very important for TM or concordance tools. If you have this data, then they can not only search certain forms, but all different forms. Let's say you give a word or present a word, misa, table, and different inflections would be used. We have this in place for the Slovenian language. It works quite well. All corpora are processed by use this technology. This could be the starting point for new dictionaries, etc. Then speech technologies, a very important part. A lot of this has been missing. We could have a speech database to collect different recordings, tagging them, transcriptions, annotating them. And based on this, we would have support tools. The final result, to have the algorithm that would be used for speech recognition and to describe this speech. Then semantic resources and technologies. Maybe it is not quite clear why this might be beneficial. It is not usable, but maybe sometime in the future, this would be quite beneficial and we would be able to use it. And we would need some semantic knowledge, which is not quite developed now. MT, I will discuss this later in a slide. Maybe this terminology portal is quite interesting. We will have the Slovenian terminology portal, search engines for different terms, editor for different term database, some sort of extractor where you can have different words for different terms and the system extracts it. Probably you know about the situation when it comes to terminology and terms. We have different portals, different search engines, no uniformity. And one thing we did, and this might be of assistance to all of us to have the so-called federation of portals, to have the central portal at the University of Ljubljana, and then the University of Primorska can install its own portal, but it will be connected to this portal in Ljubljana. They can transmit the data, but they can have their own database. And we could also have this one-stop shop where you would be able to search different resources. And these resources are available at different portals. And the last item, which might be interesting, we made an attempt to purchase some resources. We were partially successful, or maybe we were not so successful. Some things were able to be executed. Publishing houses, small dictionaries, the copyright agency helped as well. But what we really wanted, it was not possible, it was not feasible to do. The dictionary of the Slovenian standard language, we wanted to have copyright for that, and that this should be then passed on for public use, that this access would be open. But now we have different authors, some, well, are dead, and we had to negotiate with those who own their rights, and it was quite difficult to do that. It was impossible, actually. We also tried to purchase different translations from agencies, companies. Anyhow, we were not able to do it. When it comes to agencies, they often don't know or they don't have copyright for all the outputs. And you have this for just some segments and not for all. And then when it comes to other companies, it was not financially feasible, it was not viable for one company. Even if they give them 50,000 euro, it's like they sell 2 cars, so it's not quite feasible to ask owners, etc., etc. And we were not able to reach the agreement here. But we collected some other resources, the public sector examples, and then we have some new data sets on the internet, online, from abroad. They also provided Slovenian. As for MT, for the Slovenian language, we have a company who developed this code, procedures, NVIDIA is the company, and then we collected all the texts, 100 million sentences in the end, and we used this tool to filter it, and 40 million cases were applicable. We were able to use it. And this is what we have. Both directions, English, Slovenian, Slovenian, English. How much time do I still have? Not a lot, okay. I will just show you 2 examples. This is a legal text. Our MT engine does this. This is the result. Or, no, this is it. Probably you don't see it quite well, I imagine. I also made a comparison with e-translation and also some commercial MT engines. Of course, this is my subjective assessment, however, that we are slightly worse compared to commercial MT engines, but the difference is not so great. Differences are quite minimum. But we are certainly not good enough that this translation could be published, because somebody has to edit it and then publish it later. There are definitely things there that are not quite okay, but it can be used. It is not completely useless. Given the fact that you don't see it, I won't show this comparison, but I will send the presentation to the organizers and you can see these examples for yourself then. So this is my final slide. My title was, Do we still need translators? Screenshot a week ago from Twitter. The rough estimate, his company, artificial intelligence, also replaces one full-time employee, and this goes for translation. This is certainly the case. This is happening. But what is my experience, based on the translation sector experience? A lot more texts are being translated than 10 or 20 years ago. These are the texts that in the past we wouldn't even translate. Business models wouldn't call for the translation of these texts. Let's say we have web shops operating in Slovenia. They are present in all European countries. And then people comment, write complaints, and then empty engines can be quite useful in this respect. And the empty engine is replacing a human translator, which is not really the case because human translators never did such translations. When it comes to the need for professional translation, the need is greater and greater. I don't see that empty engines would intervene. Of course, rates are lower, also because quantities are larger. As is the case with every craft activity, you do more, but then you also offer a discount. This is the end result. Somebody who is a good translator, who does a good job, produces high-quality output, doesn't have to, or she have to worry about this, of losing a job. Linguistic neural models, we have large corpora, and they are trained based on this model, and the results might be quite similar. You cannot train another GTM3 model for a couple of billions of words because there are no words. The results will be quite similar, especially where you have marketing, where you don't have any provisions or rules to purchase something, to order something, to commission something. Here, there will definitely be a need for human translators, which will deviate from empty outputs that will be more unique, not like your competition has it, because everybody will have the same model and the same output. This is probably one of the areas where human translation will always stay. And my final slide. As I have said, our project is coming to an end. I think on the 7th of December we will have the event, the presentation of results of our project. You will see selected resources, developed technologies, and we will also present our website, a demo website where you will be able to test empty engines, disambiguation tools, everything. Again, on the 7th of December, you need to register by the 30th of November. It's free of charge to participate, but you still need to register. So much from me. Thank you. First, I would like to thank you for a very exhaustive and interesting presentation. Really a lot of detail. Many things are quite complex, so we probably have many questions. Does anyone from the audience have a question, please? Ravel Kodric is my name. Good day. Thank you very much for your lecture. One question. When selecting corpora, did you have the lower time threshold for that, to illustrate even more? from socialism in the former Yugoslavia. Has this been included or not? Anachronisms, is this useful or beneficial? Are they included or not? Are they beneficial for your project? Well, in theory, it doesn't harm. It is quite beneficial. An ideal MT engine should use contemporary language, modern language, if we want to produce such translations. As for what is the reality in Slovenia, this is the lower threshold, the collection of our texts. This is the lower threshold for producing something good. Therefore, we took everything that is out there for the Slovenian language, what we could have used, of course, for open access, or if we got the permission to use these texts. When you mentioned self-governance socialism, so the system from the former Yugoslavia, these texts are not digitized to a great extent and they are not available, but we have included some texts or translations of EU legislation, which can also be from the 1990s. Therefore, the answer is yes. This is the reality in Slovenia. We don't have so many speakers compared to other languages, and not so many texts are produced. Let's say Germans. For open code, well, it is 5 times more compared to the Slovenian language. But under item 3, we developed a tool to analyze or to recognize semantic diachronic words, so how the words and the meaning of the words is changed throughout the history. This is the app that is used. So yes, the answer is yes. Any more questions? Here in the first row, Matej. Thank you. I would like to know what happens if we have a corpus that is used to train an MT engine, and when you start using and MT engines are also involved in this. What is the situation here? Has anybody undertaken the study where if you have several MT engines and if they impact this process when you teach or train a new MT engine? The quality of MT outputs is measured in such a way that we have, for example, Google and other articles, they report about the quality. They have some sort of data set, file with human translations, the target and the original text, and based on this you have calculations. You compare it to the MT engine output, if there is a similarity with human translators output and the MT engine output. Of course, you could have 2 human translators outputs and both are good, but MT engine resembles more to the first one, then it is rated as an inferior. But we used one method, and we also used some sentences translated, MT translated, and the change was only a few %. It didn't deteriorate the situation substantively, but if we had more such examples, you can see these models as a parrot, and the communication is, if they see something, that they respond. If we have 100 million texts translated by humans, and if we would give them 200 million translated texts, MT outputs, then the result could be worse. But these algorithms are quite good when it comes to seeing and identifying the deviation, the error, where you have 10 examples which are the same and 3 examples are different, and they can calculate this deviation, what this deviation is all about. They do what is more, what is excess. Silvana Orel-Kos from the Faculty of Arts. I would like to know whether this is a continuous process of adding texts. Have you stopped at a certain point, is my question to you. And the title of your project. You mentioned the development of the Slovenian language in the digital environment. From what perspective do you see this? How can this project really contribute to the development of the Slovenian language? How can we understand this title? Please, if you elaborate. What is the development and what is seen as development in this context? Development of language resources and technologies to develop digital technologies. I will give you one specific example, a digital resource, the Dictionary of Synonyms and the Dictionary of Collocations. So these are two resources where we didn't use outdated dictionary procedures, but we tagged corpora with morphological and syntactical text based on algorithms. You extract what are synonyms. We don't have the old-fashioned method to put questions to anyone, to have informants, to ask them about the meaning. But we use an algorithm, and the algorithm produces results which are quite useful, in fact. I see this as a development phase. New options are available to analyze the language, to help users, to help speakers. This is the way I see this development. And the project contributed with this. Anyone else from the audience? If not, yes, we have one question. Hello, Barbara Miller from the Radio Television of Slovenia. I have two questions for Mr. Repar. The first one, the findings from my colleagues after hearing from Mr. Pošta. A food for thought. The colleague mentioned that some who commission translations want us to limit processing and editing of subtitling. We also spoke about the text alignment. And there was an idea that for big providers, big clients who develop their own language technologies and empty engines, in order to get ideally aligned texts, enabling them to use and maintain empty engines, this is one thing, but they limit translators and they don't get high-quality outputs that they would otherwise do without these limitations. You're an expert for MT. I would like to ask you whether my reflection is appropriate or I'm moving in the completely wrong direction. I would put it like this. No, it is not a planned activity. They're not doing it intentionally. The biggest translation companies, Transperfect, are not really so powerful compared to Facebook or Google. They are small players in the market. You have to be a big player such as Microsoft, Google, Facebook, to really be able to invest in such technologies. You need many processors, large quantities of data. Google, well, they developed their own processors. They didn't purchase processors from other third parties. They developed their own hardware, enabling them to train these artificial intelligence systems. I'm quite skeptical that a translation agency, even if it is a big player, that they would have their own big models. They probably use, well, as we did it here, as I presented, that they input texts, or maybe they entrusted to Google, that they use Google services for that. They might have, but I'm not really sure. My answer would be no. And my second question, a completely different area, also pertaining to your project, developing Slovenian language in the digital environment. I'm partly familiar with e-bralec, e-govorec. These are the tools our television uses, enabling the accessibility of audiovisual contents for blind, for audio transcription, partially sighted, deaf. But when we speak about audiovisual media, focus on the media, the complete communication is not done in the standard Slovenian language. There are many audiovisual materials that are recorded in colloquial language, in dialects. And my question is related to this. The project rests on the standard Slovenian language, technical language. How about Slovenian dialects? Are they also incorporated in your projects or not? How about dialect? Has it been excluded so far? And if so, do you have any objective maybe to incorporate this for speech recognition, for example? I would have to check what was the case when it comes to speech. I think that there are no dialects involved and included. But we have some formal or also informal speech examples, and this is the basis for your decision, where you have more formal or informal speech. Certainly, there is a desire or interest to include dialects as well. The only problem is, well, it is quite financially complex task. If you want to go to the Primorska region to record people, to hear their dialect, you need to have somebody who transcribes this, who annotates this. If we would be given funding, then definitely there is an interest for that, to do this. Just a short question from me, unless somebody else wishes to ask anything. A mic? I would only like to know this. Creators of empty software, do you ever speak about the possibility to say that this is empty output, to emphasize this is not output done by humans when it comes to all legal text, technical text? Is this option something that you talk about? To have this disclaimer? Maybe this is more a question for those who sell and market this translation to the final or end consumer. When it comes to our project, our demo portal, where this will be made available, we said that we will have a disclaimer about empty output that is not really suitable for final use. But probably this is more a question for the agency or those who sell this final output. I really don't know. Our company, well, only rarely do we just offer or provide an empty output, or then we say this is an option which is out there, the quality is what it is, and they know what they get. But let's say that empty developers would say this, would use empty tool, that they will put it into cat tool. It will not be. Any other question from the audience? Just briefly, I would like to take this opportunity because you are also in the company where you use MT solutions. How is this done? You get a commission for a translation job. Do you offer this empty output to translators, whether this is an option, is this obligatory, or you ask for post-editing? How is this done? Well, when we have post-editing, if they don't want to do it, we don't demand them to do it. But what we expect from human translators is that they do a good job. We have mem sourcecat tool for our translations. We prepared a set of instructions when it comes to the use of MT. They are quite detailed. Those who are not familiar with the technology, they know what is fuzzy match, what is 100% match, what signifies repetition. This is an empty output. Normally, we have hits from the database. If not, the empty engine stops, and then you can delete it by using a shortcut, and you can have your own solution. And we also say this and explain in our instructions how this can be done. Anyhow, I don't see a big difference when it comes to translation and post-editing, because you can also delete the empty output. Translators need to translate something, but how to go about it, it depends on them, which solution to employ. How about the rates? Well, it is quite an interesting topic. Our collaborators who also use empty engines, so the time that is used, the time they actually use translators, says this is our criterion for rates. We have an hourly rate for that. If the text is more demanding, if they need more time for that, then we pay more. If it is faster, then they are paid less. Well, depends. Generally speaking, I think this is more fair. Sometimes it is in the database, but you don't know it. And you don't have to do anything, really. If the time is the basis for the rate, how about translators? What is their conclusion? Because they want to save time, right, when working. What about the empty output? Does it help them? Is it worth using? Do they spend more or less time when post-editing? Or maybe sometimes it is faster to do it afresh, to translate the text from the beginning, from scratch. And what is the difference when it comes to the quality of the final output? Is there any correlation between whether they predominantly use an empty engine or not? There are differences when it comes to individual people. It is difficult to generalize. Of course, there are some people who do it well, some don't do it and do a good job. Some only rely on an empty engine, which can be a problem. Then we review this and see what is the problem, and then we quit our collaboration with such people. As for our expectations, we want to have a high-quality output. An empty output is just something that might help you. It doesn't matter whether it helps you or not. It depends on the translator, whether you use it for post-editing or not. If you need to have more time because terminology is complex, then this is also included in this hourly rate that I have mentioned. If I may intervene, I maybe misunderstood you. If you use more time, you are paid more, this hourly rate. Yes, if they use more time, we pay them more. This is the hourly rate. I trust these translators, and they are all fair. This is my experience. Nobody lied about the actual time they spent. But what is the problem when it comes to this translation industry? Characters, words, or pages were used as the basis for calculation. Then you just look into the number of words, characters. The quality parameter is not important. This is the final result. But most professions are paid by hourly rates. Lawyers, psychiatrists, etc. And just a final question. At the end of the presentation, you mentioned that there will always be enough job for good translators. But what will be the criterion for this? Who is a good translator? Somebody who will be able to use all CAT tools very well, who is an expert, who will be able to quickly post-edit and also proofread this translation. A good translator is somebody who produces a high-quality output. If you can do it faster, even better. If you can do 2 cabinets in an hour, if you're a carpenter, or if you can make 4 in an hour, but the quality level should be the same. It is always some sort of trade-off. But in my previous position, when I was a translator, I used different CAT tools, 17 in total within 1 year. I made some research. And this is also some sort of translation skill. You're capable of using IT, not just mouse, dashboard, etc. But this was also presented in the first lecture, and that you are skilled in using new technologies and tools. And then you know how to sensibly use an empty engine when this makes sense, and when it doesn't, you don't use it. But it is far from easy. And just briefly, because maybe we overrun our first part. Anyhow, in your presentation, you mentioned that we are translating more and more texts, quantities are larger, and therefore rates are dropping. For most translators, it is quite dubious, and we dispute this because we are not craftsmen, we are not machines. You mentioned carpenters. Well, translation is a creative process. It's not a craft, it's not carpentry. You cannot double your output. If the rates are slashed by 50%, we cannot do twice as much, and we will not even earn an average wage. In your company, if we speak from the entrepreneurial perspective, can you prevent that we don't work twice as hard for 50% less? A different perspective. No, I'm not saying, I'm speaking about in general, be it technical texts, legal texts, to increase the productivity by 50% or maybe by 1/3, and if the rate drops by 1/3. But something can be done. 250 words per hour. This is some sort of informal standard, the norm. You can do it. You can translate faster by using empty engines, CAT tools. The process is faster, and this standard hasn't changed substantially. It's always like this, supply and demand. If somebody offers you a larger quantity of text to be translated, they expect a discount in turn. Our first speaker, Miroslav, mentioned the concept of negotiations, and translators do not engage in negotiations so much, which is a problem. If I mention, again, a carpenter, a craftsman, you negotiate for the price. A very interesting topic. Maybe in our final roundtable we will continue, because all the presenters will be there. We will also have some practitioners joining us. Thank you for now, and we will definitely continue with this debate at our roundtable. Matej? Great. Thank you, Andraž. Thank you, Jerca. This brings us to a well-deserved break. We will have 15 minutes. We will start 12:10. Have a look, those of you here, and read the manifesto. And when you bite into the manifesto, we will have a real bite. Take a bite in the hall for some snacks. And I hope that those of you who are here on live stream also have a pleasant break and enjoy it. Thank you.
Spet lepo pozdravljeni. Drugi del konference.
We'll start with the second part of our conference. First, with a presentation by Silvana Orokos from the Department of Translation of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Ljubljana, called Whisperers to Subtitlers. Silvana, the floor is yours. Welcome. And a big thanks to the organizers to inviting me to this conference to be able to present my educational activities related to subtitling. The Department of Translation of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Ljubljana is celebrating this year 25 years of its existence. And subtitling has already been a part of our curriculum already during our old previous 4-year study process. This topic was taught by the late full professor Irena Kovačič. She was the first in Slovenia to start studying subtitling as a discipline, and she started it in the early 90s. When we transitioned to the Bologna system, the lectures and also the practical seminar was transferred to the second master's degree. During the winter semester, in the first year, students usually start by attending lectures where they learn of the history of the film art and also different approaches to audiovisual content. The majority of lectures deal with different topics that explain different specific aspects of subtitling. We are talking about functional adaptation or transcreation, which is the basic translation procedure which stands apart. I mean, according to this function, the translation can be distinguished from other types of translation. And then we continue with the presentation of national and international guidelines for subtitling. We then follow on with different topics related to subtitling of films and fiction programs. Also, the translation of culturally specific aspects, phraseology, play on words, and so on. During our seminar work, we usually use the subtitle edit program developed by the Danish developer Nikolai Olsson. This program is freely accessible on his website, and he regularly upgrades this program. The subtitle edit program has an integrated option for machine translation using Google Translate API, and he also developed his own machine translation engine for translation between Swedish and Danish. This is, of course, a combination involving systemically and culturally intertwined languages. And of course, they have a common historic and cultural background and also cooperation in the field of subtitling. This program, based on machine translation, is based for translation from Swedish into Danish, but the author always warns that these translations have to be corrected and edited manually. Usually, this is intended only to produce formally suitable subtitles. Let me stress at the beginning of my presentation that for educational purposes, we always ask students to wait a bit when they start using machine translation. First, they need to learn of subtitling or translation of contracts. We ask them not to use machine translation because machine translation cannot replace a translator, a critically thinking one. And introducing machine translation early on, when students are just learning about the process, it can be counterproductive for them. Later on, machine translation can be used when we are dealing with more homogeneous texts, when they are faced with a lot of repetition. And of course, machine translation is a safe tool only in the hands of professional translators that are able to translate accurately when it comes to meaning, language, or style. Machine translation can only assist them in producing their target text, but always the machine translation output has to be edited. Machine post-editing requires a high level of concentration because this output is more and more structurally perfect, but containing even mistakes or terminology issues. We've seen it in the translation of contracts. A great danger also lies in the loss of richness and diversity in the language. We've seen it with the reaffirmed and constant use of simple formulations that were adopted in machine translation engines or TMs. Machine translations can be misleading. They can give a general overview or a general information on the topic discussed in texts written in foreign languages. But they cannot be used for subtitling, even if vendors try to persuade us that we can use machine translation integrated in their programs to produce professional subtitles. You can see these ads on the screen. Probably you don't see the Slovenian version taken from a 10-year-old study why machine translation is not adequate for subtitling. Subtitling is dealing with important issues, high costs, the time needed to produce subtitles, and also the quality of subtitles. Different studies were made stating that we could use machine translation in subtitling, which could help us address some of the mentioned challenges. End of quote. Of course, I find it hard to understand how a time-consuming activity is related to the quality of subtitles. Of course, what we see is a purely commercial nature of such initiatives or projects. If we move on to the seminar work of our students, this is based to the progressive learning of the subtitling techniques and also the reaffirming of national guidelines for subtitling. These guidelines are designed as recommendations that allow quality and functional subtitles. When later on young subtitlers decide to deviate from the guidelines due to their own or the client's preferences, they do it by their own volition or decision, not because they are not aware of the different aspects of subtitling and audio-video translation and recommendations in this field. A major breakthrough when it comes to machine translation happened with the development of deep neural networks, especially the development of the DeepL machine translation. Translations are becoming more and more convincing, even though they are not always accurate when it comes to the meaning. We see that the language systems can be more manageable in terms of grammar compared to messages that are polysemic or highly contextual, as it is true for audio-video translation. Recently, translation done through machine translation is becoming better and better. However, machine translations cannot cope with the main aspect of audio-video translation, which is the transcreation or adaptation of message given the time and space available on the screen in order to achieve the desired reading speed in the space available. But it has to be underscored. Subtitling is not solely a transcreation. We know that different technologies are being developed for subtitles designed for people with autism. Subtitling involves different translation strategies and technologies. Irena Kovacic, the researcher, has written or wrote different articles, Subtitling Strategies, A Flexible Hierarchy of Priorities, already in 1996, or the article Six Subtitlers, Six Subtitling Texts in 1998. And already at that time, she underscored the complexity of subtitling. She realized that there is no criteria of different functions that shape the message compared to its primary semantic message, also compared to its wider context or the relations between speakers. This multi-layer aspect of every message shapes the variety of translations that can be produced by one single subtitler or even by several subtitlers. Subtitling is and remains a creative process. As we mentioned before, machine translation can achieve good results when we are dealing with homogeneous texts that have a lot of semantic singularity. But this cannot be said for films or feature programs, fictional programs. They deal with heterogeneous messages at various levels. And in the continuation of my presentation, I will present you several examples from a case study that we've conducted using machine translation of a 4-minute excerpt from a romantic comedy, And So It Goes, from 2014, directed by Rob Reiner, starring Michael Douglas and Diane Keaton. Students were given time-coded sections of this excerpt with the integral text. They translated the subtitles using DeepL machine translation. They edited and then commented on their experience. I think that this 4-minute excerpt allowed us to deal with all the complexities of subtitling films and fictional programs. Some of the translation difficulties that we've seen when dealing with this case study were related, first of all, to the modal heterogeneity of audiovisual content. polysemic of the features, then the heterogeneity in style, the complexity of lexical features, culturally and specific, historically specific references, diversity of translation strategies, and also the heterogenic procedures used to transcreate the message due to time and space constraints. Let me now focus on each of these difficulties. We know that the audio-visual translation is always highly connected to what is spoken, to the sound and the image. Translator can assess whether a certain inscription on the image should be included in the subtitle or not, and what strategy he will pursue. Students decided very differently whether a script will be included or not in their subtitle, while a machine translation always overlooks or neglects this in the translation. I don't know if you've seen it. If you see it in the image, it says Little Shangri-La, and this features also in one of the subsequent subtitles. Slovenian language, compared to English, has a much more rich morphology. For example, when it comes to verbs and suffixes. So when we translate from English into Slovenian, we are dealing with a more complex issue, especially when it comes to the gender or the number of verbs used in these messages. Machine translations decide, based on different parameters, whether they will assign male, female, or maybe the neutral gender. All those, the sentences that you see on the screen are side by side. Machine translation assigns different genders. A man says here how he took care of his dying wife, and he said in one of the subtitles, I cooked for her, I fed her, I even prayed for her. In one of the subtitles, we've seen machine translation using two genders. Male, in kuhal sem ji, and female, hranila sem jo. So a mixture of genders produced by DeepL machine translation. You were able to see also the Google Translate output, which at this point was better. Students, of course, managed to see this inconsistency and they corrected it. We know that during fiction programs we have a lot of first-person verbs used. This requires a lot of editing. And of course, subtitles need to concentrate on who is speaking, whether it's a female or a male person. An important issue is also the formal or informal you, which in Slovenian takes a different verbal form. Whether you use a singular verbal form or a plural verbal form. It is particularly dangerous to mix the two forms, and we know that already during human translation we need to focus very much in order not to mix this formal or informal way of addressing someone. And this is, of course, even more important when we are translating a series. We always need to be mindful how this pronoun you is translated into Slovenian. In this case, we have the conversation between a grandmother and her grandson. In English, how long have you been in the business? 7 years, as you well know. And then she says, every day is better than the last. Don't be a smartass. And then in Slovenian, this is rendered in a very formal way during the first part and then very informally in the second part of this conversation between the grandmother and the grandson. So he first was very formal and then informal. We know that the DeepL machine translation is sensitive to different registers. This means that they were able to use these parameters to assess this part of the conversation as formal. But then we had the smartass term used, which made the machine translation switch to more informal language. Some students noticed this and some didn't. Many saw that this is a conversation between a grandmother and a grandson, despite the fact that this smartass term was used, they continued to use this more formal language. The importance of context is also another important issue. The machine translation, DeepL, did not do well when it came to connecting the message beyond a sentence. The machine translation saw an adjective as a proper name. It translated choppy as a proper name. And then we conducted another test. We used the same wording using small letters, and because it was small caps, the translation was a bit better, but of course still not correct. We know that subtitling concerns the transition from speech into text. And in Slovenian, this usually means that we need to move towards a more formal language. In recent years, we are seeing less and less sensitivity among students for grammatical expression. We see that modern technologies promote a more relaxed form of communication. And we see this more informal language also entering subtitles. Students are usually leaving the final punctuation out from their subtitles. And also we are seeing differences in the use of word rabiti in Slovenian when it comes to a negation or a question. Here, with the use of machine translation, we see that the machine translation correctly translated the message, but the student decided to change this. In English, you know, if he parked over just a little bit, we wouldn't have to hunt for space on the street. The machine translation output was not, of course, the best, generally speaking, and semantically, but the structure was conveyed appropriately. However, the student changed it using the wrong form of the verb rabiti, rendering this into Slovenian as če bi le malo preparkirali, ne bi rabila iskati prostora, which is wrong. Structural and semantic complexity is another issue. We see in subtitling different phrases with multiple words and also phrases. This is especially delicate when we talk about homonyms, if do not have a concrete relation between the homonyms. Of course, these phrases are a very frequent form of expression, especially in the English-speaking situational comic programs. Play on words are always difficult to translate, and we use a lot of time and our cognitive resources to translate these play on words. And of course, we also have the time and space constraints related to subtitling. A lot of difficulties can also be caused by phrases that use this multimodality of the audiovisual medium. Speakers sometimes use an image or a sound to substantiate their word on play. But of course, when it comes to proper names, this can be even more difficult, especially when it involves the main characters. This is the case of the owner of the block, Oren Little, and this block is called Little Shangri-La. Of course, we know Shangri-La is related to the hotel chain and also the fictional paradise on earth. So a lot of play on words, which allows for several solutions. As I've checked through the solutions proposed by students, none of their solutions were, of course, optimum, but machine translation really overlooked this word on play, or play on words, sorry. Did you happen to mention that I own this building? So you own Little Shangri-La? Little Shangri-La? The machine translation, of course, renders these parts quite wrong because it uses the female version of owner. So again, a female version of Shangri-La. So if students are not paying attention and if they count on the output provided by machine translation, then of course they cannot provide a better solution for this play on words. Then we have culturally specific references. We might have discussed this already in one of my previous points. We know that culturally specific references usually refer to the original culture and also the general culture. Sometimes it is especially problematic to translate references that have a specific connotation or a figurative meaning. In the next case, the real estate agent uses a metaphor that is taken from the usual free time activity done by American men. Due to the space-time constraints, 3 students out of 10 decided to paraphrase this using a hypernym. And of course, machine translation cannot produce such an output. In English, all I need is this one last sail before I cast my line in the river. The machine translation, of course, does not render this into the fishing activity. So it is very word by word. So before I retire, I need to sell this house. So these are all solutions used by our students on the basis of machine translation. Translation decisions are always moving from transferring the structure to replacing it with a completely different structure. And sometimes the inadequacy of the machine translation stems from the wrong translation strategy. Dick and Willie is here a reference that machine translation renders wrongly. Oren Little says, "For Pete's sake, will you cover your dick? I'm trying to eat a sandwich." And this, in machine translation, is rendered, of course, very formally, and he uses this in the context of being near a child who is changing the wet swimming suit. And then in another situation, Oren Little says, "So I got a dick in my face, right? Somehow I'm to blame." And then the child says, "He said dick." And the machine translation renders this very literally, using the non-formal expression. And we have a completely different style used by the machine translation. And then in the next scene, we also have a reference to Willie, with the original saying, when he was a baby, he used to play with his Willie like it was a rambunctious puppy. Ko je bil dojenček, se je igral svojim čuvajem, which is completely changed. So this output shows that the machine translation is, in a way, looking for the immediate context, and here it saw this as a reference to a dog or guardian. And then a bit further on, in English, "If he can help me, I'll play with his Willie." And in this instance, it completely changed the meaning and did not maintain the main style as in the previous subtitle. The heterogeneity of different procedures when it comes to the transcreation and adaptation of text due to time and space constraints. I don't really need to dwell on this, and I don't have any example to show you, because machine translation at the moment is still not capable of producing such transcreated or adapted translation output. Machine translation can be introduced in the educational processes, but only when students already understand the complexity of translation processes, when they are already able to produce their own subtitles. Machine translation can be misleading and they can distract them. Students that edited their machine translation usually spent the same amount of time to edit the machine translation that they would use if they translated the subtitles from scratch. Some students spent less time, but their results were not satisfactory. Students welcomed the access to such language technologies and similar technologies, but they are aware of their pitfalls. They are also aware that such editing requires a lot of time, especially when we talk about post-editing subtitles that are machine translated. Machine translation of audio-visual content cannot be superior to human translation when it comes to the message, language, or style. It usually requires a lot more transcreation. And usually a human can do it best. Currently, machine translation can be used as an additional tool, but only when used by competent professional translators. The result of machine translation when it comes to audio-visual content is now more like a telephone game or whispering, horse whispering if you want. So it should remain considered as such. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think that we have some time for a few questions from the audience, and then, of course, we'll also have a round table with all the speakers. So first, let us ask the audience, do you have any questions for Silvana? Otherwise, let me ask a question myself. It was interesting for me to learn how younger generations of subtitlers are being trained. Most of us here have been doing this for years, and of course it is always interesting for us to learn how younger generations are now being trained. You mentioned that at the beginning of your course you asked them not to use machine translation. Later on, maybe during the master course, does this change? We see the ubiquitous use of machine translation all over the place. So do you also focus on ways of using machine translation to their benefit? Yes, within different courses, I think especially when they focus on translation technology and tools, they deal with these skills, so how to use machine translation, but we do not have a special course only dedicated to machine translation. Well, practice has shown us that this is becoming more and more frequent. Mr. Repar mentioned that they provide some sort of style guide or instructions for their translators when it comes to the use of machine translation. Well, yeah, we are currently introducing some changes, and we are introducing machine translation and dealing with machine translation also in other courses. But we always warn the students that they need to be critically assessed. They need to be able to critically assess the output provided by machine translation. Some of our colleagues at the translation department are, of course, more in favor of using machine translation. So are they focusing on post-editing? Yes, some of them do. So when it comes to gaining professional skills do you maybe focus also on the business or entrepreneurial aspects of translation process and translation work? So looking for clients, preparing offers, invoicing, and so on. Yes, this is included in one of the courses. I think it's called the business aspects of translation work. We also deal with this during our digital technologies as well. So I think that we do cover these business aspects also during the studies. It was surprising for me to hear you say that students are missing or leaving out the final punctuation. I can see that they are leaving it out when they are communicating on social media, but do they really do it in subtitles? I think they simply forget to use the final punctuation. I think for them, one subtitle is like one SMS or message that they use in social media. The final punctuation is usually missing at the end of the subtitle, not the end of the first line. So, I don't know, probably this is when they start thinking of the second unit. This is really interesting, and I would never have thought that this could happen to a human subtitler. This is maybe interesting and important also for editors and proofreaders. They need to be careful when it comes to final punctuation. We need to wait for the microphone. So you've conducted this case study on a film, not using a documentary or a YouTube conference or any similar content. Yes, we only used it on film because this is the main topic of our seminar. Of course, I can imagine that when it comes to documentaries, the results could be or would be better because the input text is more homogeneous. As I mentioned and tried to stress, fiction programs are always very heterogeneous and they require more cognitive processes, more layers of thinking, while with documentaries we have more singularity when it comes to meaning, and of course the results using machine translation could be better, I suppose. Thank you, Silvana, for these answers and these comments, and we'll continue with the roundtable discussion later on.
Thank you, Jerca. I'm especially pleased that I can invite to the podium this year's Sovre Award recipient for the best fiction translation. We have Katja Zakrajšek, please. Good day, everyone. I'm probably one of the rare translators of fiction, at least in Slovenia, to also make use of CAT tools when translating fiction, and I will also present some example of poetry later. I was invited to tell you something about CAT tools, what is my take on this, which is why I also presented this illustration. But probably it will slowly emerge how I'm using them. What, in my opinion, is also useful for translating fiction. We will see what happens when it comes to the automation of translation of fiction. Let me just mention this, that all examples are taken from my practical work because this was the easiest thing for me to do. Transparency is probably one of the greatest benefits when it comes to using CAT tools. I believe that all of us who have to translate large, long texts, especially books, we soon realize that we miss or skipped a sentence or two somewhere along the way. In principle, here, this cannot happen, which is undoubtedly beneficial, but it also can happen that when it comes to segmenting, you can hit a rough patch. We have some technical difficulties. Anyhow, when it comes to segmentation, this is no panacea, magic bullet, because especially when it comes to fiction, these are segments that are sometimes quite long. And the second capture screenshot shows that you just have one single sentence, which I had to segment manually later, because this solution failed in the CAT tool. Therefore, everything can be lost or forgotten even if you use CAT tools, but generally speaking, great transparency is one of the greatest benefits which persuaded me to also use CAT tools. And consequently, you can provide a better solution when it comes to consistency, especially in fiction. Things are repeated, and this is done with a purpose. Everything is changed if you don't have consistent solutions for different words. Of course, you can do this manually altogether. However, the CAT tool makes it easier for you to use the concordance search. I will give you a very simple example for this. One of the segment, but of course this also works in the long run if you have longer segments of the text. What is also interesting, and some are surprised to hear that I use glossaries in Trados. Well, you don't have any special terminology when it comes to a novel, let's say. In fact, however, it also happens that a certain author uses his or her own specific terminology. I'm presenting here some examples from an experimental novel in a state that doesn't really exist, a fictional state, but they have different special categories for the population and residents of this state. And they function as their own world, as their own terminology. This happens throughout the novel. It is easier to compile a glossary, and then you make sure that you have consistent solutions throughout the text. As you can see, things or terms are quite bizarre. And another thing, why glossaries might be useful, and you can abuse them if I use this term, are different names. I had one example when there were many typos throughout the book, and you can use the glossaries. They serve a good purpose. Sachsenhauser is Sachsenhauser, and you don't have any problems when it comes to orthography. Of course, these are quite banal cases, but in fact, they actually help you because you can focus on what is essential when translating fiction. because you have to pay a lot of attention to these aspects and not focus so much on technical aspects. And another thing which I find very important is workplace ergonomics, because we have shoulder and back strain due to typing. And it magnifies if you have to deal with a book. This is how you do it. You try to type and watch different pages of the book. You are far removed from the screen because you look at the image, you look at the book, and there are different positions. When you try to see the page, type at the same time, again, shoulder and back strain. My first-hand experience, I also had some problems because of nerves which I pinched. And then there are different solutions, and what has proven to be a great help for me was this technology, especially when it comes to my health status and physical level. This technology is a very helping hand in this respect. Of course, this might be very technical aspects. There are routine aspects of our profession, but of course, none of it makes fiction. But what really makes this individual fiction? What is the work of literature? Well, everything depends on your judgment. This is what is something special when it comes to fiction, and it has to work in the translated text as well. This is something that is different compared to other writers or authors. We can speak about different types of style. I will use a female writer here as a generic term. How this female writer appropriates the language, how it is being transformed to serve her own needs and purposes. We speak about different registers. We heard a lot about it today. Then linguistic characterization, or formatting, how to create different characters. Then aesthetic aspects, how you create the text, Bachtin's orchestration, multiple voices, how everything is composed to have this textual heterogeneity. We also speak about language policy or policies of the text. Everything, of course, here depends on your judgment. I will present a couple of cases now. When it comes to fiction, you can have strategic variations, repetition. I call this a chorus. I use this term. One example from the novel, experimental novel, Tram 83. It is composed in a way that it is the sound of music. I used and searched files. Well, imagine that you have different Word files and you use this search engine. You have many hits throughout the book, more than 30, let's say. And there are different variations. They are more complex. First, you shorten them. And then this means that you have to parse this syntax. Can you read this? Ask the speaker not so much. The North train station is the main character of this. Well, there was the resemblance of this train station, different churches, septic tanks, everything, and different generations, nationalities. It speaks about a miner's town in Central Africa. And then there was a girl as she dresses on Friday evening. This is this one segment, metal frame, this metal frame in the first segment. And then there were two bitter tears of a man. And then you have this mental frame again. And then not far away from this railway station, we have this mental frame again. Again, we see this metal frame. It functions as element of syntax. It is an insight. It is violated. This is a deviation. And of course, empty engine would only see this as a deviation, but in fact is a metaphor, is an intervention of style, and this continues. What is the common denominator? Again, this metal frame, gold rush, miner's town, and then the last segment, the last chapter of the book. This is extended. There are different variations of the whole concept. I think this is a very good example where an empty engine can help you, but cannot assess, judge, or provide solutions. We heard a lot about references today. Below, one segment from the youth novel, Le Petit Train, the last box. There is a rhyme which is well known in the French language. Petit tracteur laisse pas, l'amour n'attend pas, love doesn't wait. However, here it is a little girl who writes to her father, and the father doesn't know about her. Petit facteur presse la paternité attend pas. So fatherhood doesn't wait, because she would like to hear from him, for him to respond. This doesn't exist in the Slovenian language, the concept as such, yet it refers to her letter. Well, postman rings only twice, only 3 times, because she wrote to him on 3 occasions. This is the 3rd letter, and if you don't open the door, you will never learn that you are indeed my father. And this is this judgment, whether to preserve the reference or not. This culture reference, will it function well in the Slovenian or target language in this case or not? If not, how can we replace this reference? And also, what will be the impact? Again, an empty engine cannot do that for us. Whether this will be seen as something funny, recognizable, visible, it depends on the context of the text, of course. Or again, a question, domestication or adaptation of different names, what to change, what not to change. I have some examples of pseudonyms of the girl, and she uses them to denote different people she is related to, or the father that she doesn't really know, but she has different ideas. And Klaus von Strumbel, a philosopher, which functions quite well in the Slovenian language. I didn't make any changes here. And half-brothers, 3, she doesn't know them. Joël Noël Citoyen, she uses this. It sounds a bit funny, humorous, funny names. And if you put them all together, it is quite funny, and this is a literary reference as well. When it comes to the Slovenian languages, for teenage readers, this doesn't convey any message, it doesn't mean anything to them. I contacted the author. She translated her novel into English as well, and I asked her what did she use in the English language, and there was a solution, pak, Jacques in mak in the Slovenian language. Added value, Jacques even sounds a bit French for us, and this quasi-French, because this was the translation of a French novel, I used it on a number of occasions, and it's a very good match. It fits well into this context. And then the president of the state. In a nutshell, references have been completely changed, but it serves the main function, the trio of names that fit well together and are funny sounding, and they are also a culture reference. Popular culture is the reference in this case. And then the first French president, female president, Barack Obama, we will call her that. The novel was written several years ago, which was a topical name, but I believe that even in 10 years' time it will work quite well. Here I was thinking of whether to preserve Barack Obama. Probably a machine might do it as well, but then I used Obametka in the Slovenian language because it bears resemblance to our female name Metka, and therefore Obametka in my translation. You have to judge, estimate, assess. I believe this is especially the case when it comes to humor. Will an empty engine extract this humorous context or not? Maybe this is a question for other people, not so much for me, whether it will understand something that is funny. How about sonority, sound features? Girl, woman, other. It's not seen as being written in verses, but if you read it, she felt self-surging with energy. She was hyper, she was high, she was coming back to life. You can rap even this segment, I think. The main protagonist left a very violent relationship or husband. Well, it's not just about meaning. You have to translate it at different levels as well. You need to preserve this sonority, acoustic, sound properties, even if you have to mix the text or maybe change word order. Or maybe this example, again, Frischsprechbomb, or the piglets in the English language. There is a reference to slam poetry, and this is what happens in the Slovenian language. They talk, the main protagonist says something to a big guy. He was slamming about the life where he washes windows and always from Chazy to Paris in the opposite direction, and this trains with the murderous eyes. It's very hot, I'm going out of work, and then you are too big for these low ceilings, I skip. And then again, the people, and they are all in a rush where you make business and you say, this is France, my country. Well, it happens in fiction. No characterization that this is really slam rhyming, but they are composing the text if you read it. And then this speech, poetry has to be preserved as well, the rhythm, performative language. Again, this has to be first noticed and then decide on the strategy, what to do with it. There are some technical problems with the presentation. I hope that you didn't see it, because I really wanted to first pose a question or a riddle for you. There is one translation where I had to create a word, coin a word. This is one word. I will read it. And what is the word in the English language? What is the origin of the word in the English? Nadpreklično, perfektno, prekrasna. Which one? Superfragilistic-expectilidocious. I was thinking about how this might work, and if I translate this with the right rhythm, it really has this reference. The rhythm, in fact, creates this culture reference. And then different puns, word plays, you have to coin certain words and have to use your creativity, imagination to do it. You cannot see it well, which is why I will limit myself to this first example. Again, from the Piglets. There is a boy, negative character, Maro. He ruins the bikes, slashes some tires on the bike. And do you know who is the culprit? And she saw him, actually. Malotru. In the Slovenian language, Malo is the name for the boy. I didn't change it. I didn't change most of the names, with some exceptions. And of course, here I had to make this word play to have this connotation of malo, to link the context, and malorednež, or a bad guy. And this works quite well in the Slovenian language. And another example, these are my notes for translation, Krakar's poem, a Slovenian poet, into the English language. He wrote about Holocaust, and the dead got tired. I just wanted to show that this is process throughout the page. First 4 verses, different variations, different versions, and what is below, marked yellow. It was something that I thought might be a final version in the end. What is my message here? Poetry, or especially segments from the novel that I have just demonstrated to you, where sound properties are very important. You need a lot of space on the page. You can also manually write this to test different combinations, variations, because you need to translate it in a non-linear way. You look at the whole text, you go back, going up and down, you combine, you test certain solutions. This is the right opposite of how I could, well, of how an empty engine would do it. And my final example of different headaches for translators, multilingual original texts, especially when we speak about global languages such as English or French. Some time ago, there were 2 consecutive books for me which I translated, and I had to deal with Nigerian pidgin called Naija. The English original was the version. It was not just about translating, but also to assess the context in a given moment. What was the story here? The status of Nigerian pidgin in the Nigerian society and vis-à-vis standard English kept changing, because it refers to different times, different status of the language, Nigerian pidgin in the society, and also different status of the lingo throughout the text. In one case, the author stems from Nigeria, then we have a British author. And I treated in translation this different version differently throughout the text, because I felt that it calls for different translation strategy. To use colloquial register in one case, and in one case not, because it functions well as a normal colloquial register of colloquial English. If I summarize, CAT tools are very beneficial also in translating fiction. You save a lot of time because you don't have enough time because rates are quite low, and therefore you have more energy, better focus to deal with what really matters when translating fiction. Then when it comes to health problems, you address that as well. It is quite good and beneficial, but when it comes to humor, puns, wordplays, rhythm, sonority, doesn't know anything about intertextual or suprasentential level, doesn't understand metaphors, doesn't know what will be the impact or effect of all elements in the artistic whole. It cannot decide on the level of adaptation to the target audience, and what I didn't mention here, it cannot in fact cooperate within this process where when we speak about small languages, translation and even more the translation of fiction means that you develop language expanding the borders and limits of one's linguistic expression. I was thinking about this, that I could use an empty engine if we would, theoretically speaking, have a very large corpora, not my personal corpora. Maybe it would point to certain intertextual links and connections, but still you need to judge and assess whether this is coincidence or not of presenting such elements, whether they are relevant for the text, whether the target audience will recognize this or not. And this only goes for one language, but sometimes you refer to some things which are not even translated in your language, let alone mentioning the area of copyright. This is just science fiction, technically speaking. Other than that, I just want to say, and probably you've deficiered this already, that I am not an advocate of the automation of fiction translation, but however, technical support is welcome. I also don't believe in post-editing, because when it comes to fiction, you need to go deep, you need to process it as a whole. As we already heard from our Czech colleague Miroslav, we can expect an inferior translation output. I've just read some arguments presented by our French colleagues, saying that empty output, once you see it, it cannot be seen as a shortcut, but a bypass and straying the way that you want to go. It doesn't really save time, but only extends or prolongs the time, because first you need to get rid of this wrong direction or the path that you have taken. I believe that the translation of fiction, well, not just this area, but all creative texts, not just artistic texts, are really a borderline example of the usefulness and applicability of empty technology. We also mentioned marketing text, tourism brochures, etc. And of course, essays in philosophy can be creative as well. And the translation of fiction is really at this extreme end of this continuum. As I have stated already, technology makes technical aspects of working with the text easier, better accessibility of information, which is great, also better cooperation options throughout the entire process. I first and foremost refer to better links, networking with other colleagues, translators, with the entire book's editorial team. Despite the perception of this perception of art is not really a solo activity, but still the main tool remain the translator's brain. I'm the cat, if I refer to my first slide. Thank you very much. Thank you, Katja. Now I invite you to join us at our round table. This brings us to the end of the final part of our conference, which is the round table. I would like to ask all the presenters to join us here. We will also be joined by Mirek via Zoom. We will have another opportunity to put questions, so you can put them in the chat. And of course, you can put the questions here by raising your hand. I give the floor to Jerca now.
First of all, Katja, thank you very much for your presentation. And hopefully Mirko is also with us. Mirko, can you hear us? Mr. Pošta, are you with us? I think we have the connection. Okay, we can see you and hopefully you can hear us. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, hello again.
Okay, so we have the connection. First of all, what is your opinion or view on a phenomenon that we are seeing more and more frequently? We see translation vendors or intermediaries that started to differentiate between higher ranking translations and lower ranking translations, or so to speak, a higher and lower profile for certain texts, meaning that machine translation of low profile text is perfectly acceptable. The high profile translation can and should be given to human translators. What is your take on this? Some translators believe that this is totally unacceptable. They believe that it is unprofessional for translators to deal with certain text with less effort, with less time. Translators always work to the best of their abilities every time with each and every commission of the translation. What is your opinion of that? Do you think that we can distinguish between less and more important translations or texts? Maybe first, Mirek, please, the floor is yours. What is your opinion on this?
Thank you. No, I don't think we should differentiate on this basis between different texts, between different programs. And also, I would like to add one more thing. And it is not only about machine translation, it's also about QC or quality control, quality assurance. What happens very often is that only some programs, only some translations, the high-profile ones are QC'd. And I think that is even more wrong than using or not using machine translation for different types or for different programs. I think this should not happen. I think that everything should be QC'd.
Mirek, what is your take on my question, initial question? Well, on behalf of the faculty, our translation department, I think this is completely unacceptable, totally unacceptable for us. We cannot rank texts and we cannot rank competencies, because this would mean that we would encourage students to specialize for, so to speak, lesser texts, and we would encourage others for high-level translation. This is totally unacceptable for us. I think that we should all strive to the best of our abilities, and everyone should put all their effort into any translation. When it comes to subtitling, unfortunately, we are seeing it already today. Some clients agree and accept even subtitles of lesser quality. But this, unfortunately, is something that we cannot have any impact on, because we are talking about commercial activities and commercial purposes. Yes, I think clients or translation agencies or intermediaries are mostly doing this. And of course, the question that this raises is what are the criteria to say that a text is more or less important? For some viewers, sportsmen and their statements are as important as any other text. I would be interested to learn your opinion also from the audience. Do you ever decide to not pursue the highest possible quality when you are translating? Just please wait for the microphone. Yes. I think I've discussed this with a translator 10 years ago, and he said that in his translation agency where he worked, they already use this ranking of texts. They said that some texts were more important, others have to be translated more quickly, and accuracy was not that important. And on the basis of these criteria, they decide how much time they can devote to each translation. And of course, this is also relevant for the setting of price and quality. Personally speaking, I think it really depends on the purpose of the document. If we are talking about an internal text that is more important in terms of its function, you probably don't need to lose a lot of time polishing it. Any other comments? Well, I think I can agree with this last position. It really depends on the purpose of the text, who will read it, how long will it be available, and where. And I don't think it's only translation agencies or translators themselves. I think one of the factors influencing this is clients. If you have a website and if you have a subpage somewhere hidden below, maybe they do not want to translate this text as well as the rest of the text on their website. So this text could remain non-translated. It may be available only in English, or maybe they offer a machine translation just to give an overview. So it's always about trade-offs. When we talk about statements by sportsmen or a public TV or a public media, I think all of these statements should be translated as well as possible, with the highest possible quality. But when it comes to clients, of course, it's always their decision. And then it is up to the agency or the translator to explain what this or that decision means. So the client should be the one deciding whether they accept a lower standard or not. Well, I think it makes more sense not to rank the importance of the text, but to rank the purpose of the text and the intent. When I was translating dog food or cat food documents, I felt like a machine. When I learned the terminology, it was just about using the right term and using the right percentages. Not saying that this text is not important, but it does not require that much cognitive processes. If we are talking about an artistic text, a philosophy text, which is innovative in its use of terms, I think this is a completely different story. And then, of course, when we come to clients, I first have to underscore that we have an opposite problem as literary translators, because in literary translation, it is not expected, or it is even frowned upon, that you might want to use any language technology, that you might want to use a digital format of the original text. And this is not only true for Slovenia. A few years ago, I translated a book, a philosophical book, and I asked the editing house to give me some sort of digital form of the text, or PDF, or anything. And then, of course, our editions contacted the French media, and they sent the English PDF, but I needed the French, the original digital form, in order to use it in my translation tool. So all of this took so long that finally I gave up, and I just translated the book from the book without the digital form. Or sometimes you get a scanned version of the book, and of course the scan is not perfect, and you cannot see the entire text, and so on. So sometimes literary translators have a completely different position. I think that PDFs are becoming more and more available, because this, of course, helps us avoid any weird or crooked scans. So in our field, we still need to encourage more and more digitalization, because no client ever asks us to use any digital tools. You mentioned several digital tools in your presentation. So did you start using them in fiction translation, or have you used them before in your previous translation work? You mentioned dog food or cat food earlier. No, when I started out, I'm not sure this was even available. I started using language technologies and cat tools with literary translation. But it is true that I talked to my colleagues who said that they use this for different fields. And this was something that caught my attention. First, I learned about MemoQ and their free version, and then I decided to opt for Trados as my preferred cat tool. But I think most literary translators are still shocked to learn that I use this tool, and they are quite reluctant when I mention my use of this. This happened during my literary translation residence, and of course I was surrounded by other translators, and I was able to show them how I do my work. And of course they were quite interested in learning about it. Another issue that we haven't touched upon just yet is copyright. Generally speaking, copyright when it comes to all published material, but also for translations that are fed into the machine translation engines. Miro already mentioned this in his pre-recorded message. He talked about the micropayments that should be given to translators whose translations are being used to train empty engines. András, you mentioned that you had certain difficulties in obtaining sources for your machine translation. Well, we received some translators from the Opus website, and now this site is no longer available. We weren't really aware of any issues or difficulties, and of course when we learned about the copyright issues, we decided to remove these subtitles. You probably know that Open Subtitles is a pirate server. on which different subtitles are uploaded. Some of them are professionally made, others are made by fans. Usually they are given or stolen by TVs and uploaded on this website. But technically speaking, was this really useful for you? You probably only had the Slovenian version, or did you also receive the English original? Well, we got hold of both of these versions, but of course we later learned that they were protected by copyright and we removed them. Do you think that it is possible to regulate this area in any way? I think the main question here is who is the one that will pay for the use of these translations. If it's Google, should it be Google itself, or should it be the user of Google services that pays for these copyright? And of course, again, it is difficult to assess whether a translation was really useful for the development of a certain machine translation engine. Another issue is, of course, that here in Europe, we talk about this a lot and we cannot use certain material because we don't have copyright, while in the United States, they don't care about any of these issues and they use all of these materials available for them and they produce better solutions. But yes, you mentioned that some of the purposes of this project that you presented was to provide language tools. And yes, with us, Slovenian subtitlers, cooperating with agencies, some of them are forcing the subtitlers to use their machine translations. And they all stress that they have their own proprietary machine translation engines. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. You mentioned at the beginning that you want to make sure Slovenian language is not lagging behind when it comes to language technologies. Do you think that there are agencies, translation agencies, that are trying to gain a foothold in this area? Were you maybe overtaken in your project? Well, yes, it is true. Everyone can build their own machine translation engine if they have enough money, if they have enough resources, if they have enough texts to feed them. Are there any questions or comments from the public? If there are no questions, I would like to thank all the participants. Thank you, Mr. Pošta, for being with us, and greetings to Prague. And thank you all for being here in the hall and for following our streaming online. Thank you, Jerca, for these concluding words. And many thanks also on my behalf to our foreign guest, Mr. Pošta. And many thanks also to all the other lecturers for your presentations. Many thanks to our technical support team from streamai.com company. Many thanks also to our human interpreters, Jana Zidar-Forte and Romana Mlačak. And also many thanks to the Association of Slovenian Film and TV Translators for a very good cooperation. Thank you for your time and for attention. On behalf of myself and also in the name of the association, I sincerely hope to be able to welcome you also in our future events, and I wish you all a nice day.